Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joins us. My name is Olga Atamanova, and Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform starts its operation today. It's year 9 of the war, and it's day 341 of the full-scale invasion of Russian aggressor in our land. And I want to thank the representatives of all the mass media who help us to spread the information, to spread the truth about this war. In brief, our schedule for today is as follows. At 1:30, joining us will be Serhiy Brachuk, head of the Public Council under Odessa Regional State Administration, and we'll talk about the situation in Odessa region. At 1400, we will have 14 discussion with the topic, the domino effect, how the Russian-Ukrainian war changes the global information landscape. Joining us will be Emin Japarova, First Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dmytro Zolotukhin, expert on information warfare, Artem Bedenko, head of the Institute of Information Security, and Vadim Denisenko, Executive Director of the Ukrainian Institute for the Future. And joining us online right now is Ivan Fedorov, the Mayor of Melitopol. Mr. Ivan, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Mr. Van, what are the news as of today, as of now? Well, any news from Melitopol? What can you tell us about? Well, first of all, I want to say that on this social media it's being actively discussed the destruction of another railway bridge. The bridge was destroyed back in May. The Russians were trying to rebuild it afterwards, and now for an umpteenth time it's out of order again. But I want to emphasize the importance of that way. The Russians tried to move with the railway their heavy machinery, their heavy material and equipment. That was the way from Melitopol to Tokmak and further on to Berdyansk and Mariupol and Donbass. So that was the bridge they were trying to use to move their heavy equipment and material. So that way is not accessible for them anymore. Last week we were all talking about another Russian propaganda being debunked, and it being debunked again and again. They were spreading the information about the efficient counteroffensive in Zaporizhia region, and that they presumably captured a number of settlements. That was all not true. Our armed forces clearly understand where the danger may come from Russians, and our plan is to liberate all the cities and towns and villages. But the result of Russian propaganda that they were talking about are the hundreds of Russians who ended up in hospitals or are missing in action, or they're coming back to Russia in the black plastic bags. So all the hospitals in Zaporizhia region are currently filled with wounded Russians. And now we see that due to a big number of collaborationists in Zaporizhia administration, to a small number of persons who don't wish to collaborate, the Russians keep bringing their local representatives to establish some order and law in there. So, but the newcomers were not disseminated around the smaller villages and other settlements, but they are being concentrated mostly in Melitopol because they're all afraid of the resistance. They're just afraid that the local citizens in those villages and small towns would just kill all of them. Because after almost a year of the occupation of our lands, our citizens make it clear that they're not happy with the presence of the Russians. Now we see that the Russians, they start legalizing the torture chambers and the prisons in occupied territories. There are orders on legalization of 28 new prisons in Zaporizhia region. Recently we were saying that in occupied Melitopol there are at least 5 torture chambers. So part of them are already made legal. We've also seen that the Russia started doing the inventory of buildings and flats and apartments, so they require the property paperwork, and we understand that those who are currently staying in those apartments or homes are the relatives of the owners of the property, but the Russia still require all the paperwork to be produced in proper manner. And the same situation is with the passportization of citizens in occupied territories. The Russians say that those citizens who don't receive the passports before the 1st of June, they will be recognized as the citizens of other countries, and they will fall under a different taxation regime, which will be twice higher than for those who would receive the Russian passports. So in Melitopol, the tax inspections made up by Russians, they have the accounts with the banks located in Tula region of Russia. That's another absurd thing made up by Russians, but we'll see how it evolves. Mr. Ivan, as to the explosion in the bridge that you just mentioned, do the Russians have any logistics alternatives? Well, we have to understand that the 80% of movement from occupied Crimea to Russia is made through occupied regions, and it's for automobile transport. This route can still be used by automobile transport, but the railway transport cannot be used for this way, because that was not the only bridge which was blown up. There is a number of others, and I think that they will continue exploding or falling, because the logistics of Russia is the first thing that should be destroyed. So what's the situation in Vasilievka? Is it still impossible for our citizens to live through the checkpost in Vasilievka? Yes, the block post is completely blocked for the time being, regardless the fact that the Russians promised to open it back on 15th of January. It's still closed. We started getting the information from the local citizens that there was an explosion of a vehicle on a mine recently near Vasilievka, but there is still danger in the gray zone, and it's impossible to live even through the gray zone. And there is only one route of evacuation through temporarily occupied Crimea, then on a ferry or through a Crimean bridge to get to continental Russia, and then on the way to Europe, either to go to European Union or to the border with Georgia, and only then our citizens may end up in the country where they would feel safe. But the Russia's border guard, they are loath to let the Ukrainian citizens through the border, so there is no some guaranteed way of evacuation from occupied territories. Mr. Ivan, what about the resistance movement in Melitopol, and are there any recent results? Oh, obviously they continue doing their great job. The Russians obviously don't feel safe in our territory. Last week they got a command, don't walk around with guns. And they walk around with their guns ready to fire all around the place because they feel the resistance. They organize a number of provocations, and they are all due to the fact that they don't feel safe after a full year of occupation. Today, our special services and our armed forces know perfectly well about what's going on in the occupied territories in Melitopol, and in the adjacent areas about the movement of personnel and heavy material. Thank you. We have questions on the floor, dear colleagues. Good afternoon, Olga Panasenko, Ukrinform. Could you please tell us, do we have some information that there are people coming from Kadyrov to Melitopol? Do you know what are the areas that they want to take under control, except for the fact that they rape and beat the Russian journalists? Thank you for this question. I want to start with the following. Today, the collaboration in the occupied territories is extremely low. So the Russians want to talk our citizens into collaboration, but now that they realize that they cannot make it, we see that the citizens of Russian Federation don't voluntarily come to occupied territories, and Kadyrov troops are the only category who go there voluntarily. They take some government agencies under control, such as courts, prosecutor's office. I mean, not the government agencies, but the so-called government agencies made up by Russians. And we've seen that about a month ago in the temporarily occupied territory of Zaporizhia region, there was a visit of Armen Sarkisyan, who was appointed a curator for the prisons and torture chambers in Zaporizhia region. So now all the businesses are separated by the spheres of influence among such people as Kadyrov troops as well. Mr. Ivan, you said that the Russians try to legalize the torture chambers and the prisons. What do they do it for? Do we know what is the number of such prisons or torture chambers, and what is the number of people being detained there? I mean, our citizens. Unfortunately, we cannot say for sure what is the number of people who stay there, but we know that the Russians moved at least 3,500 people from the prisons to temporarily occupied Crimea, obviously in illegal manner. And within almost 1 year of occupation, in only Melitopol city alone, there was about 1,000 of our citizens kidnapped. For sure, hundreds of them are currently imprisoned as prisoners of war. Some of them stay in Melitopol, some of them were deported to Crimea, and some of them were deported to Russian Federation. So the topic of the latest weeks is deportation from temporarily occupied territories. First, the Russians were bringing our citizens to their first block post, and our citizens had to walk to the nearest Ukrainian block post. So in fact, now they only shoot those propaganda footages near Vasilievka. They bring people there and then they take them away back to the prisons. So it's about hundreds of people that are being currently in prison, detained in prisons in Zaporizhia region. Last question is about the circulation of hryvnia. Russians wanted to prohibit the circulation of hryvnia. They wanted to prohibit the circulation of hryvnia, but have they made it? Well, our citizens keep preserving hryvnia, waiting for liberation, because everybody remembers what the Russian ruble turned into during the occupation of Kherson region, and now it's mostly ruble which is in circulation. And when the Russians prohibited the circulation of hryvnia, its rate grew almost twice. So now 1 hryvnia costs at least 2 rubles. And so our citizens preserve hryvnia and they wait for the occupation. Thank you for all the information that you provided, dear colleagues. I'm reminding you, joining us was Ivan Fedorov, the mayor of Melitopol. Our next briefing is at 13:30, and we'll talk about the situation in Odessa region. So bear with us, trust in our armed forces, and glory to Ukraine.